Hello again, this is Julie Mansell from Gem Ministries International, and the next phrase, or the next couple of words I want to talk about is the beast. There's lots of theories and popular culture in Christianity around who the beast is, and various people throughout the centuries have been defined as the beast, and the beast is going to come, and you've probably got your own stories around that. But I want you to go back into early first century Christianity and have a look, because it tells us quite clearly who the beast was. Now, in historical writings of the time, not necessarily Christian writings, but other historians of the time, they described one of the emperors of Rome, the Emperor Nero, as the beast. He was a tyrant and he was a beast, and he lived at the time leading up to AD 70. I think he died somewhere around AD 69 or something, not quite sure exactly of the date. But he was a hideous beast, and he was, when you read about Paul wanting to try to get to Rome, there is quite a number of theologians that believe that he actually wanted to get to Nero, to preach the gospel to Nero. And obviously, I think Nero died before he actually managed to get there. But why was he considered such a beast? Well, he had a few behaviours that would put him in that category, fair and clearly into that category. He would take the Christians that were being persecuted at the time, would be hung up on posts and tarred, and they would set them alight and use them as candles in his garden while he ate dinner in the garden, with the Christians burning as literally human torches. Some of them that hadn't been set on fire, he would dress himself up as a wild animal and walk up to them and eat and bite their genitalia. He kicked his pregnant wife to death. He castrated a boy that he married. He was also a paedophile and homosexual. He would roam around the streets dressed as a wild animal, attacking people. He was a real, true understudy of that word, the beast. And not only that, but interesting, when you in the Jewish alphabets, each letter is allocated a number, and when you spell out his name in Hebrew numbering system, guess what it comes to? 666. And if you do it, if his name was spelled in the Greek form and you spell that one out in the Hebrew name structure, it comes to 660. And you'll see both of those numbers referred to in Genesis as the beast. John, in his Revelation, talks about him, and they talk about him quite covertly, because they are, remember, in that time when he is persecuting Christians. So that was the beast. It's not some person in the 21st, the 15th, the 18th, the 19th, the 20th, the 21st century that's coming out of the woodwork in history of political figures. It was Caesar Nero in the early 1st century. Bless you heaps. This is Julie Mansell from Gem Ministries International. Hello, this is Julie Mansell from Gem Ministries International, and the next phrase that we want to look at in this series is the phrase, the mark of the beast. And we look at that in Revelations chapter 13, verses 16 and 17. And they read, "It also causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of his name." So we talked in the last video about who the beast was, and that was the Caesar Nero. And this was a pretty common practice in those days of emperor worship. And Julius Caesar started this way back in his day. And it was a continuation of that Roman imperial cult, and was especially dominant in the eastern provinces, where we have this new fledgling Christian church emerging. So to get into the market where people bought and sold food, it was known as the agora, they had to show that they had paid homage or given a sacrifice to the altar or the statue of Nero, and had some ashes from that sacrifice on their forehead or on their hand. And they also had to say Caesar is Lord, because that was a common part of the whole process. So you can imagine how this was quite traumatic for the new fledgling Christians, because Jesus is Lord, and to have to put this on their hand and say that Caesar is Lord was not something they freely wanted to do. They were also excluded from the various trading guilds, which meant that many of them lost their ability to continue in their line of work, in their businesses, because they wouldn't take this mark and pay homage to Caesar Nero. So that is the origination of the mark of the beast and what it meant to the culture and the people of that day in that early first century Christian church. It's nothing to do with putting a chip in your hand or getting a COVID vaccination or any other thing that we have tried to come up with in the 21st century to say that this is the mark of the beast. It was a first century problem for the first century church that needed to get into the market to buy and sell food and sell their wares, and needed to get into their trade guilds as well to practice their trade. So this is Julie Mansell from Gem Ministries International. Hope you were blessed by that revelation. Hello, this is Julie Mansell from Gem Ministries International, and the next couple of videos are going to be on some particular characters that were around in history around that first century when the early church was growing, and then we move into AD 70 when the temple was destroyed. So the next guy I want to talk about is a man called Flavius Josephus, and he was a first century Jewish general and a scholar, and he commanded forces in Galilee during the first Jewish-Roman war. And finally that army was defeated and he surrendered to General Vespasian, and Josephus became a slave and an interpreter. Now he became a firm friend of his captor's son Titus, and with him he witnessed the siege and destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. And after the war, Josephus was granted Roman citizenship and wrote several books. And the most famous were the Antiquity of the Jews and the Jewish War. So this is the book of the Jewish War that he wrote. It's quite a thick book, and it's written in quite old English, so it's not an easy read. He was important in the fact that he actually witnessed the destruction of the temple in AD 70 from an impartial, almost obviously it was Jewish, but an impartial observer, like he had no involvement in either side. He was a slave at that time, and just recording what happened historically. And a lot of his writings are what we can use to give us a basis and understanding for what was actually going on in that first century and the events that were happening, and help us to decipher biblical prophecy from the accounts that he wrote at that time. So that's the Jewish War, written by Josephus, Flavius Josephus. There's a picture of him there, which you can see. He's a kind of interesting looking dude. So this is Julie Mansell from Gem Ministries International. This is Julie Mansell from Gem Ministries International. Now we're going to look at two more characters, Vespasian and Titus. Titus was the son of Vespasian. We briefly mentioned Vespasian in the previous video as the one that defeated Josephus when he was fighting the Romans. Vespasian also was spectacular and successful in invading Britain in the time when Roman Empire was expanding out that way, and was appointed by Emperor Nero. Do you remember we've talked about Nero previously as being the beast and the mark of the beast, and asked to go, well, probably not asked, but told to go and look at the revolt that was beginning to grow in Judea. The Jews had had a relatively peaceful relationship with the Romans, even though they were the Romans had occupied Judea and everything in the area around. The Jews had a good relationship, but things were starting to become unsettled and people were starting to revolt, and there was a rising revolt happening in Judea. This was all the prelude up to the AD 70 destruction of the temple. So Vespasian and his son, so he had 2 legions of men, and his son had 2 legions of men, and they were sent to Galilee and swiftly and brutally deal with the uprising that was happening. Then Nero died, and Vespasian and Titus were claimed as the new emperors. He was left to fight off other rivals for the throne, and this was Vespasian was left to fight off other rivals for the throne, and he left his son Titus to finish off what was going on in Jerusalem. Now Titus overthrew the city, and also his men started to get a little bit out of control and then overthrew the temple and destroyed the temple as well. So Vespasian, Titus, and together with Domitian were the Flavian line of emperors at that time. So we have quite a bit of Roman historical stuff happening alongside the new church, a new Christian church that is starting to grow and take hold in that area. And remember, you may recall a few videos back when we talked about the day of the Lord, how God used other humans to come and bring judgment on the nation of Israel when that was needed. And this is what we're seeing here, as God is using the Roman nation to bring judgment through these men onto the old Mosaic structure and the temple and all the worship that went on at that point. This is Julie Mansell from Gem Ministries International. This is Julie Mansell from Gem Ministries International, and this is the last in this series of short videos, and the last word that we're going to look at is the word Antichrist. And if we look at 2 John chapter 1 verse 7, this is the only place that we actually see the Antichrist described. And that says, "Many deceivers have gone out into the world, those who do not confess that Jesus Christ came in the flesh. This is the deceiver and the Antichrist." The word Antichrist is used only 4 times in the New Testament, and all of them are in John's letters. And it was always and only a reference to a false teaching plaguing the early church that claimed that Jesus did not possess a physical body, and this heresy was known as Gnosticism. So we can read in 1 John, what I've just read out to you, that the Antichrist was those that believe that Jesus did not come in a physical body, and that was the Gnostic teaching that had captured about 1/3 of the early church believers. So John's 1 John, 2 John, 3 John, he is trying to rebuke that not heretical teaching that Jesus did not come in the flesh, and that is where the Antichrist word comes from. Anybody who does not believe that Jesus came in the flesh is against Christ. And it is as simple as that. It's not some political leader that's rising up in the 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st century, or somebody that's going to come in the future. It was first century teaching that was coming into the church called Gnosticism that John was writing to counteract what the people were starting to believe. Bless you heaps. It's Julie Mansell from Gem Ministries International.